Right now, let's step into Module 4, where we will talk about the post-processing volume settings. We will get familiar with all the light components which we have in the scene, like directional light, skylight, and so on. And we will talk about the settings of all of these light components. We will also use the HDRI to put our car into HDRI environment, and we will also create some simple minimalistic environments using basic shapes and Quixel, and also we'll create some more detailed environments using the Quixel Bridge 3D assets, not only the materials. Let's start with the simple scene and the post-process volume settings. First of all, let's create new level, and we will go with the empty one, so I can show you how to create all of the light components really quickly. We can obviously add them where this tool, which is like quickly add the project component, so there we can add it one by one, but there is a quicker way to do that. So if we go to Window, Environment Light Mixer, and here you have all the components for quickly creating all light components in the scene, which is like skylight, atmospheric light, sky atmosphere. We don't need volumetric cloud for now, and create the hide fog. So it will quickly add all of the light components into the scene. Let's quickly overview it, and we will dive into the post-processing volume settings before we start with the environment creation. So if I put our rig into the scene just to see what each component does. If you are familiar already with Unreal Engine, you probably know what it does and what it is for. Directional light is basically our main light in the scene, which is sun, and you can move it quickly with holding Ctrl-Alt on your keyboard and just rotating the mouse button, changing the direction of that directional light. Then skylight basically gives us this fill light, which will fill our scene with this source of light, which is indirectional. This one is directional, and this is like global light. So if we hide it, you will see that we only have one light, and it looks really, really strange in that case. So we really need the skylight for creating this fill light and basically filling the atmosphere of our sky, and it gives some bleed color onto our geometry. And if you would like to change this bleed color, you can use the sky atmosphere, and this parameter basically changes the color of the bleed light, and it will just give more of this like bluish, and it will stylize our environment a little bit. It's really good for setting up if you would like to have some foggy weather or like overcast. You can change this value or color, and you will have this like grayish environment without the color bleed. Let's cancel it for now. And this one really affects the path tracing also very much. The skylight uses by default the real-time capture. So when you change the position of the sun, you will see that our skylight also changes the color, and it is dependent on the directional light. If you don't have the directional light in the scene, this will not happen. And if you don't have the atmosphere, you will not have the skylight at all. So yeah, you would better use like real-time capture, and it will be updating with the sun position and so on. So it's like really cool sunset here. We will get deeper with the settings of each light a little bit later. First, let's get into the post-processing volume settings, and we will see how it affects our car and our like overall scene. It's better to show with the environment which I have created. So here is the blueprint tunnel, which is in the project file, and you can use this tunnel just as like, you know, typical environment. So this is a simple blueprint. If you open it up, you will see that this contains of multiple modular models and some 3D assets from the Quixel Bridge with those lines which are placed as the decals, and it is supported with some rectangular lights. We'll get into this also, and that will basically create this scene, and this one is really simple to, you know, manipulate and copy. So by holding Alt, let's make it a little bit longer and just create a copy of that one, and we'll connect this one here, just one more, a little bit like that. Yeah, cool. So now we have really long tunnel for our car to travel. Okay, so let's move our car a little bit here. And let's see what we can do actually with the post-processing settings, post-process volume settings. If we add it here, we can go to the visual effects, post-processing volume. By default, this post-processing volume only affects this cube, and you would rather need to make it bigger. Like, for example, if you want to have different settings for different locations, you can set it up here, right? So that would be, for example, only for tunnel, and you can just like make it for the tunnel shot, and it will be affecting only the tunnel. And when the car gets out of the tunnel, you can change like all the parameters, and your car will be in a different environment, light or temperature of the picture. So basically anything you want. Right now I will reset that one. But if you want this to affect the entire area, first we need to set it to unbound, so infinite extent. It will affect the whole area, and if I change something right now, it will affect the entire level, and that would be like either super bright or like super dark, like this. So basically it affects the entire level itself. Okay, and before we go here, I'll just explain main settings which I'm using and other settings which I'm not usually touching because of the reasons. I'll explain why. And this is the typical settings which I do globally, but let's go through all of them. So by default bloom, the method is a standard method which just blooms the image. If we go into bloom standard, and if we just increase that, that will give us this, you know, soft look, and also it will create those terrible lens flares. The thing is, I never use lens flares. I just hate how Unreal creates them. I don't see any like diversity of these lens flares, and they're just not well done. And I see them in most of the renders over internet, and people just don't touch them. They leave it as it is, and it just like looks really terrible. So what I offer, so there's lens flares. I usually set the intensity either to 0.1 or like completely disable them, because I really don't like how it looks like. First of all, let's reset our bloom settings to standard, and let's set our lens flares to 0.1. The thing is that lens flares are connected to the bloom. And what I do also, I use the bokeh shape and just like increase its size, so it just gives some, you know, little noise. It's not over distracting, but you see something is happening here, but it's not that distracting as by default well you want it. It's just like it looks terrible. I really either prefer to use some lens flares which I can get from DaVinci Resolve or like Fusion after rendering this. So I increase the bokeh shape like to something like 8, and for bokeh shape I prefer to pick the bokeh shape, like you type bokeh and you can find the bokeh like circle one, and probably just even increase it more so we don't have it like really seen. So this lens flares is tied also to intensity of bloom. The higher the bloom intensity, the more you see of those lens flares, but I really don't like them. Just no. Just let's set it back. The usual bloom setting which I use is convolution, because it gives this like star bloom and it really looks good on the car paint, or if you have sun is in the scene. So let's like put sun over here. Yeah, see, so it gives like this really good feeling of the sun. It looks realistic and really nice feeling of directional light. So I think it just like looks better than the default one. So the standard is just like blurs it out, and I would really like to have the convolution having all of those really star glowing things. So something like that. Then there is like threshold, convolution scatter dispersions, how much it will go like this in terms of the sizing. So yeah, see for example on the car paint, this one gives really nice thing. But keep the convolution scatter dispersion to the default value. It just looks like more real than with this increased size. That's just like overkill. Regarding the exposure, you can use automatic exposure, which is set by default, auto exposure histogram, but I prefer to use manual because I would like to be in charge of my exposure and set it up myself, because I really don't like how it works. This one is really good for games because it has this sort of adaptation of the eye adaptation when you go into dark environment and then it brightens up, or when you get out of the black environment onto the bright sky, you also have everything like super wide, and then it just like gets back to usual value. But I don't do that. I prefer to use that with like as a like real camera filming, and picking this one with a manual and set up it for my particular desired result. So I think the 9 will be fine. Apply physical camera exposure. I keep it to physical camera exposure enabled by the reason that if you don't use that one, you will have something like that. It's just like not working, and the physical camera exposure is enabled by default. The thing is, if you create the camera and change the aperture to 5.4, for example, you will get the picture a little bit brighter, and that one can still define how bright or dark it will be. But with the physical camera exposure, you will not have this like strange, like unrealistic, exposure settings. So I keep this one to physical camera exposure. Okay, so it will work just like in real life. When you set up the aperture to wide open, you will have more light into the camera and the picture will become brighter. Those settings are, as I said, are made for auto exposure. As you see, if I change this one from manual to auto exposure, it will set up like really bright. And those values like max AV just like define how dark and how bright gonna be the areas like of the maximum and the darkest and the brightest point. So you can just define it yourself. And when you go into something darker place, it will start to adapt and make it brighter or darker. And this is like defines the speed, how fast it will go up and how fast it goes down. But as I mentioned, I prefer not to use the auto exposure histogram, because when you are working with this one, sometimes when you render, your camera just starts adapting and you wanted some particular exposure setting in the very beginning, and the camera just starts adapting and you're just like, no, that's not what I wanted. So no, just I don't like that. I like to have everything under my control, so I don't want to change anything here. So okay, let's move the sun out of our view. Okay, so let's look at our scene and continue. Like the chromatic aberration, pretty like, you know what it is. It just like adds some distortion on the edges, but you don't go like with a huge amount, just a little bit is enough, and remove it from center. The second parameter just like moves it out of the center, so you can see. Let's make it a little bit outside so you will be able to see it better. So if I go with this setting intensity, if I increase this amount, you can see that there is like some fringe appears, and this one removes it from the center. So if it's 0, it starts from like almost in the very center of the frame, and if you move it out of the frame, you have it on the side. See, on the side of your viewport or camera. That is really good to add some of the fringe to the camera, especially if you're having some anamorphic camera. That can look good, but don't go like really with the high values. We need to have something realistic, so we are not going to use like some insane scales for that one. Just maybe a little bit, maybe like 0.7 or something like that. So it adds a little bit of fringe on the edge, not much. And let's move it out of the center. Dirt mask, that one I like. I really like to add the dirt mask. If you go and type screen dirt, it just like adds some dirt on the screen. As you can see here, just like some spots appearing, just giving you a feeling of not clean lands, and it just like adds some details. You see like here. So if I disable that one, see, it appears here. On the render, you can notice that, and it looks really nice when you have some tint here. Okay, with the camera settings, what I do, I usually set up the shutter speed. As you remember, we are rolling 24 frames per second, and this value of the shutter speed should be double your frame rate for getting like the best motion blur. So set it to 84. Also because the shutter speed, it works like a physical camera. So the lower the shutter speed, the more light you allow to get on your sensor. So your exposure will change a little bit. So if I go like, for example, I don't know, 240, you see it's becoming darker because we are letting less light into the sensor. So let's set it up for 48. With the ISO, I don't usually do that, but you would, if you want, you can use that one. It just gives you the opportunity to add some more exposure, but really with the small values, just like little by little, just more fine tuning and adjustment. Aperture, stop, and this one I don't touch. You can do that in the camera inside like your sequence, because those are actually duplicating the parameters in the sequence. And this is my favorite, that's local exposure. So if you see that your scene is like too contrast, you have really bright lights, obviously you can go into the blueprint, like edit in the blueprint, go here, like, okay, there is like some material, white light. Let's open this up, this material, and decrease it value of the emissive power to 15. Save, okay, cool, still too bright, right? With this local exposure settings, you can define what is the contrast for highlights and for shadows. And you can make the picture a little bit more flat, but introduce more details in the shadow. For example, if I go in the shadow contrast scale and just decrease it, okay, now I can see like there is a caliper, there is a wheel, like there is something happening, right? So there are some details, they got introduced. It's not that dark. So it's better to have a little bit more details. Anyway, you will be able to work with that on the color grading stage afterwards. Then I think, well, okay, those highlights are too bright. They're given this like star convolution bloom thing, and I don't want that. I can just like disable the highlight scale. So the highlight, the most bright areas will be like cut with the maximum brightness. So it will cut it off a little bit, and you'll be able to, you know, get more flat or HDR look. So you have more details in the scene. So if I disable that, see, it's like super dark, and here just like feeling better right now, right? Detail strength, it's just like, it's the middle tone contrast. So mid-tone details, and it will be just increasing these values. And blurred luminance blend will just give the blur around the brightest objects. I don't touch it most of the time. Middle gray bias works with those two settings. Basically, it defines the middle gray point from which the contrast will be stretched. So yeah, the higher, the lighter, the lower it will be darker, but still maintaining the contrast ratio. So if we just like go 1, it will be darker. I also don't touch it most of the time. Lens flares, we already talked about that one, and I hope we both agree that it is terrible how it looks. So just like keep it 0.1 or keep it disabled completely. Image effects, vignette and sharpen, basically self-explanatory. It just like shades the um, the edges, just like on the camera, the vignette, the default value is 0.4. You can disable that completely, but I keep it for just the sake of reality. Depth of field, I don't touch it ever because this is still for the camera settings only, I believe. Just like you can play around with that one. I don't do that at all because that's basically the camera settings, and this will be overridden with the camera sensor size, squeeze factor, and so on, because you will be anyway changing that for yourself. Color grading, here I only use temperature on the white balance basis. So I can set, for example, a little bit colder. So I want the colder look. So I set it to 6000. See, it gives some like more toning, especially like in the shadows. If I go with this temperature a little bit colder, just feels good. But I don't change anything except like this one. If we increase this one, obviously we will have something like a real, this tunnel. But I hate this color of the tunnel lights. But okay, for the sake of realism, I think this one really works well. But from my experience, I think it is better to change the light material color components. So if I go there and change the color of this one to some like this terrible yellowish, and change all of the lights which I have, but there is like a lot of rec lights, and I'm not gonna like select it one by one. I can just like type rec light, select all of the rec lights in my scene, and let's check. We don't want the shared route. Let's select all of them and just change this to this terrible yellowish color which you have in the tunnels. I just really don't like it. And you will have more real light scenario. Probably I need to decrease the this lamp emissiveness, like emissive color. Yeah, also change it to yellow. And I think, like from my experience, that would be much better to change the emissive color of the light to yellow, and it will give you more realistic result than changing the temperature in the color grading stage here in the post-processing volume, just because it doesn't tone the whole picture yellow, but adds this like yellow fringe which you actually receive from the light sources which you have in your scene. So yeah, I think this one hasn't changed too. We need to change this one on this side. Yep. It's wall lights. Let's name the wall lights. So if we go with the wall lights, also change that one to this awful yellowish color. Yep. So, okay, definitely it looks more real, but I don't want to go for that look. And also if you go with this temperature, also here you can just adjust the entire scene to, some strange colors. Anyway, I use that just to fine tune the temperature just a little bit, because I really would like to avoid going overboard with this one. But for example, if I see that it's like something reddish, I can change the tint a little bit towards green and have this even more terrible like tunnel light look. So yeah, this is how it looks like. Definitely we're not going for that look, so let's reset all of this wall light colors. Just like let's reset this one to white, and this rectangle lights, select this one too without the shared route, and this one, reset this color. Okay, let's see, and reset the temperature in the post-processing volume back here, and the emissive material color like this. Yeah, and make it a little bit colder as I made it in the very beginning. So 6000, just a little bit colder, just gives this like feeling of the cold light. Those settings I never use, because like you can play around with this like global toning, change it to like red or like green or whatever. You can go crazy and create some like psychedelic environments, but I really don't, I'm really not a fan of using this global and like other color correction inside of Unreal Engine, because you have better results and more precision on the render afterwards in DaVinci Resolve. Just those tools are cool here. You can, you know, try doing that with a color grading here, just like having some offset towards like, I don't know, like maybe a little bit more bluish, just, you know, to get this cold like noir look, whatever. You can try also play with exposure, like locally, working with the gain, gamma, and shadows here, for example. So if I go with the shadows, gamma, just like increase a little bit, I will have less, you know, dark shadows, but still the result is not there. When you're working in DaVinci Resolve with this one, it just looks so much better and so much more realistic. So I don't touch this one. You can play around with these things. This one is responsible for each exposure part, histogram. So this one global affects the entire image, shadow effects on the shadows, midtones on the midtones, and highlights, obviously highlights. In the mix section, I use only this setting, blue correction, because for some reason, like electric blues in the ACCG color space for the render will be like over bright and just like super strange. And I enable this one to diminish this bluish factor. And in ACCG, when we render an ACES pipeline, that will look proper and it will not blow out like with a super over saturation. Other things I don't use, that all is fine. With the film also, I don't touch the film. It's like, I like how it is set up just as it is. It's basically controlling the darkest and the whitest point. So if you go like black clip when it clips, white clip when it clips, and just like, I don't know. I just don't use it. I keep it as it is. So I don't mess with this one with exposure settings, because I still do that in DaVinci Resolve, because how I perceive like that's my approach to that one. How I perceive Unreal Engine, I perceive it as the playground where I have like real physical camera and I film the footage inside Unreal. I don't do the like color grading, all of that stuff inside Unreal. I set up light, the scene, and film it inside Unreal and perceive this footage as filmed one. And when I put it in DaVinci Resolve, I just color grade it like a movie or like a commercial, like it was filmed on a real camera. I never do that here, any color grading. I just find it pointless, because we are working for the final product of the cinematic. We are not looking for some real-time cool performance game or something like that. We are going for cinematics, and I treat it just like cinematics. Okay, so let's move on with finally our quality of the lumen and performance and so on. So first of all, we always keep the global illumination as lumen, because first the ray tracing was deprecated, so probably it will never go back, and it can give you some bugs like with the translucent materials like this. You see it's just like appearing, disappearing, and not all of you have the ray tracing. Yeah, see, yo, wow, that's insane. So see, it was deprecated. Some materials don't work with that really good, so you can have those bugs. I just like generally don't use it. Just even if you have the ray tracing GPU, don't use that. There are other things what we can use ray tracing for. So keep it always lumen. And for you guys who don't have the RTX GPUs, let's cover lumen. Never just don't touch this one. It's just like fine as it is. So what I usually do with this all reflections and the ray tracing stuff and so on. First of all, we will cover the one without the ray tracing. I just crank up all this lumen lighting quality, lumen scene detail. Probably, I don't know if the video is like a little bit compressed when you're watching it, but the reflections here on the car are just becoming a little bit sharper. So final gather quality maximum. We don't need the real time. We need the fast rendering, like insane fast rendering, and we will get it anyway with these settings cranked up, just like in like super high. Lumen scene light and update speed all to the max, just like this one. I don't touch the skylight leaking. We don't need the ray tracing global illumination because it's disabled. No need in that one. Indirect lighting color, it's some more atmospheric thing. It's just like how the skylight behaves and how the indirect light just affects the scene. I keep it as it is. I don't touch it. Reflection, again, reflection method is Lumen. There are a few things which you also like. You can pick the ray traced. I just don't like how it looks. It looks bad, and again, it's buggy. Just keep it Lumen. It works really nice. Lumen reflection, set the quality again maximum, just like crank it up. It will be much sharper and much better in terms of the reflections. High quality translucency reflection, that should be enabled. So, but we have it enabled in the project. So you have really nice reflections on the glass here. You can see that's like, see it's reflecting, but still Lumen works with the reflections, screen space reflections. So if you pick like another angle where you don't see the source of light, see, it will be disappearing, right? So still it uses screen space reflections. So sometimes you will probably, you know, not having the good reflections. Screen space reflections, again, it is quality which is used by Lumen, so it may increase if you set it to maximum quality. Regarding also this setting, so you can even crank up and increase quality of the Lumen reflections, but unfortunately if you use heat lighting for reflections, it needs ray tracing for that. Unfortunately, you would need the ray tracing, especially like when you have the max refraction bounces. It also requires ray tracing if you have more than one bounce. So with Lumen, you really limited with the reflections on the glass, how well they behave. But here, this is what the maximum quality that you can get from Lumen. But if you have the ray tracing or like use the heat lighting for reflection, you will see the immediate increase in the reflection. So if you enable heat lighting for reflections, right, you will immediately see if you have reflections here, you have reflections of what you don't see in the scene, right? So you have the reflections on our car paint. You see that it's like hidden there. You see these reflections of the red ones, of the red lights. But if you set the project default, which is like surface cache by default, you will not see anything because it is not here. And in that case, what I usually do if I want to support those reflections, because it's not possible, like it is physically incorrect. You should have something there, right? But the thing is that even though you don't see, for example, source of light, and if you rotate it like that, right, you still have that, right? So that's a nifty trick. So when you have the reflection, Lumen reflections, right, you still can reflect the light, which is really cool. And I like to support Lumen reflection with the placed lights in the scene. Yes, it will not reflect the objects which are outside of the screen space and the player view, right, or camera view. And you don't have the retracing, right? So you have GTX GPU, you don't have RTX. So what I do, I just put the rectangle light, for example, right, like here, and increase its width, for example, make it a little bit smaller, so it will be like a small strip right here, right, and just decrease it to something like 1 or 2. See, here we go. What we see right now, we see the line of the reflection. We see a little bit more light on our wheels, making much more details and showing much more of the stuff here. And that really works well. Of course, with the heat lighting for reflections, that would be easier. And next one, let's see what we can get with the ray traced translucency reflections. So the thing is, in Unreal, you can separate ray tracing for glass materials, like translucent materials, and for opaque materials. So anyway, what it is doing. So first of all, let's see what is the difference with and without the post-processing volume. And right now, let's get into the ray tracing translucency. So the reflections are lumen, but for ray tracing translucency here, we can pick, but if you have the ray tracing GPU, set it to ray tracing, and you will have much more detailed reflections, and it will reflect what you don't see in the scene. So see here, so if I change ray tracing to raster, I don't see those reflections. Lumen still uses screen space reflections. Yes, they are better. As you can see, there's like really good reflection of the mirror here with a high quality translucency reflections. But with the ray tracing, it just like you have everything what is in the scene, everything. And that is like defining factor of the ray tracing. So you don't need to do all of these optimizations, enabling like high quality translucency reflections, supporting the reflections on the body with the like with these additional lights, which helping to show more of the details. Yes, obviously it is better, but still with the Lumen we'll get really nice results. So for now, let's disable translucency, keep it raster, and just disable it for now. But yeah, you see, it's just like, it's not there. Only if I see this part in the screen, so you can just like try putting your camera the way that you have what is like other things which will be reflected in the scene. So yeah, but still, it is manageable with Lumen to get a cool render. But you need to consider for the camera angles if you would like to catch some reflection, or just support this reflection by creating like rectangle light and maybe like duplicating multiple of them and placing them into the scene. And you will have like really this nice thing happening on the body. So that will be like happening here on the body glass. So that's for the Lumen settings and the reflection quality and settings. So yeah, this is it. Other settings are managed for, again, translucency here, how many refraction rays, just basically given it a bunch of refraction rays will increase the quality of the reflections and enable refraction, so it will bend the glass a little bit. But anyway, those are just like the quality settings. I never use like so much, like usually 3 or 4 is just enough. About the motion blur, again, you need to set up the target FPS for motion blur, as we are saying 24, and I keep the amount at usual value, so during the render you will have the proper motion blur. Film grain just gives the film grain on your image, just making it grainy. I don't go with this like maximum, like 65 is fine, and just increasing the values in the highlights and shadows, sometimes giving like the shadows a little bit more, so it will have more texture in the shadow. This is it, but you can adjust for everything. So for example, in highlights, there should not be so many. So you can just decrease that in highlights. And that will be a little bit grainy image, giving you more like realistic look or noisy camera look if you're cranking up ISO and filming in the dark. Path tracing, we will be talking about the path tracing later on during the render for these settings, what it does and how to set it up and which components should be rendered. Otherwise, this is all what I'm using for the post-processing volume settings and how to tackle the Lumen issues with the reflections if you want to, give it more details